Hey guys, gals, and non-binary pals. I'm your host Hannah, and this is Under the Scrubs. Y'all, what a wild week. I feel like I've been saying that every week almost. We are on episode 32, and it's kind of crazy to think that I'm 32 episodes in, and this all just kind of started as me ping-ponging ideas off of Chris and dreaming up this idea when we were out on a walk, and now here I am. Got me a little microphone, 32 episodes in. We have a move-in date coming up. Been kind of packing lightly, but I need to get like a little bit more aggressive with it. Problem is, your girl's out of Vyvanse, so my ability to stay motivated is out the window, down the street, has not been seen since. That's been a bit of a struggle. And then to top things off, I mean, luckily Fern stayed out of the ER, right? But anytime we start to get a little financially comfortable, so we went out and like bought a new couch set. Okay, it's on the outlet clearance. It's under $1,000. We got a couch and a love seat. Ooh, and it's cute. It's comfy, and it's gonna be delivered on the day we move in. What more could we want? Yeah, one of our cats' abscess is back, and so now he's gonna have to probably go back to the vet. Fern, I swear to God, if she has to go to the ER, I'm gonna like cry. Shakisha, she remains our golden child because she doesn't require vet visits. I don't know, just kind of keeps to herself. She's never been an outside cat. She doesn't want to hang out with poor people, and that's where poor people are, is outside. She is the judgmental reincarnation of Satan who runs my household, and she will let you know what her 2 cents is, whether you asked her or not. I think literally the last episode, you might have been able to hear her in the background because I was behind closed doors. And how dare I shut a door that she can't get into? I don't know. Hopefully my editor, aka Chris, did a good job of cloaking that sound out. Just kind of getting excited. We've got all these ideas for the home coming up, but we will see if my ADD can focus on the tasks and complete them. I have a bad habit of allegedly starting things, and then I'm like super motivated. I'm like doing them real quick. I'm like feeling real good about it. And about 85% of the way through, I lose all steam and I don't want to do it. And I lose all of my will to live as well. I just want to lay on the floor and do nothing. So we'll see how that works out. Today's timeout, and this is a reflection, if I may, right? I feel like shit's a little heavy here in the US. I don't want to get into politics because the reality is politics at a basic level revolves around taxes, gun shit, zoning, laws, whatever, right? It doesn't revolve around your sexual orientation, the, skin color, what kind of weird ass porn you watch, what your hobbies are, whatever, right? Those issues are rooted in a much bigger problem like racism, sexism, misogyny, classism, and just flat out being kind of a hateful, shitty person. And that is where I will quote the Bible and say, whoever lives sin-free may cast the first stone. I am an empath down to my core, as I feel like a lot of us who work in healthcare are. I know like COVID was a pretty rough time. I had to take a break from social media because it was really difficult to see the amount of people that were dying, especially by themselves. And then you go online and people are like, well, it's not that bad. There aren't people that are dying, and just a lot of like negative shit that comes out of people's mouth, right? I think collectively we have an empathy problem, and this idea that we have to be correct about everything. It definitely ties into like an anti-intellectualism that, we're seeing with the introduction of AI like ChatGPT, Copilot, whatever. I have a hard time wrapping my mind around people who can just throw something into ChatGPT and then all of a sudden they are more knowledgeable in that thing than the subject matter expert, right? So like telling your doctor, oh, this is what I have. And it's like you're going to tell like the doctor who went to school, studied the subject, got degrees in it, took on the student loan debt, all that kind of shit is somehow inferior to something that you typed into on ChatGPT. Like, I don't know. I can't wrap my mind around that. That to me is just kind of crazy. I think we lack the ability to listen to someone with a difference in opinions. listen with an open mind. Like, I'm very curious about, like, tell me about your beliefs and help me understand why you think the way you do. Like, I'm not going to attack you. I'm just curious. I had to take a critical thinking class in college, and I thought it was so self-explanatory to be able to critically think. It was really cool because, like, you at the end of the quarter, you wrote a paper about a controversial subject and you argued for it or against it, whatever your opinion was, and then you had to argue the opposite. So it was kind of cool to be able to teach you to look at both sides of something, right? I just can't figure out why we don't try and listen to others with an open heart and mind and see where their struggles might be coming from, or what life experiences that they've had that led them to believe what they do. I feel like it's getting really exhausting every time I get on Beyonce's internet to just see hatred spewed in videos and comments and online arguments. And you got people with these weird parasocial relationships with individuals who have never met them. They don't even know you exist. And then, like, people are willing to send death threats to others because you don't agree with them or you've got some weird online beef. Like when I got a few death threats from an opinion I had about a Love Island contestant, that to me was crazy. If you find yourself so triggered by this, maybe it's time to do like a little internal reflection and ask yourself why. Why can you not hear things that go against your beliefs? I had a counselor, great guy, who told me that, you have to learn how to sit with emotions that make you feel uncomfortable, that maybe you don't agree with. Kind of approach it with a curiosity, like, why do I feel that way? So maybe it's time to start doing that. Maybe it's time to start trying to be kind to others, give a little bit of grace, bite back hateful words, replace them with silence, or maybe something kind or supportive. And that's crazy, by the way, coming from me, because I have a lifetime ban on Tinder for bullying men. So this shows personal growth. Shout out to me and my therapist that I've trauma dumped on for several years. You're welcome, and I'm welcome. Resources for today's episode is the Dr. Feelgood Documentary, managingpain.com, Spokesman Review, and Nurses. So can we prosecute doctors for the way that they practice medicine? Is it their responsibility or is it the DEA's responsibility when it comes to managing opioids outside of the doctor office? Today we're going to talk about Dr. William Hurwitz and how he was essentially charged like a drug dealer when in his mind he's just helping patients with chronic pain that had nowhere to go. Now, Dr. William Hurwitz also went by Billy. In 1971, he graduated from Stanford Medical School, and he knew he wanted to be a doctor. He just didn't have like a specific specialty that he wanted to go into. He knew he wanted to engage with patients and take care of a lot of them. And so after his internship, he actually got a job as a medical director in the Peace Corps down in Brazil. That's where he ended up meeting his wife. After their return to the U.S., they just happened to have a stroke of luck, and he got involved with pain patients. And with like these chronic pain patients, he said it was like a simple problem that had an answer, and that proper treatment would give patients their lives back. So initially, Bayer used to advertise heroin next to aspirin for pain relief in the early 1900s. There was that subpopulation of patients who got addicted to it after receiving a prescription from their provider, and that's kind of what started the whole narcomania epidemic, right? There was a paper that came out in 1985 by Russell Portnoy and Kathleen Foley, and they published this paper that said, hey, we gave these 38 patients opioids and they did super well with managing chronic pain, and that no dose was too high. There was a retired doctor, Dr. Hal Talley, and he said that when he had gone to medical school, that they were told that you can treat pain postoperatively for a day or two. You can treat pain if the patient's expected to die within 2 to 3 weeks, but you can't treat chronic pain because you will create addicts. Dr. Hal Talley went to med school somewhere in the 70s because they had learned that, you can't treat chronic pain, you can create addicts, but then in the early 80s, they started learning that what they had found or what they had been taught in medical school might not be so accurate anymore, right? They were told to not have opioid phobias when they are prescribing them, that if it stops working, just go up in dose. And so he talks about how the process of a doctor seeing a patient and they start prescribing opioids to a certain point, then either they wouldn't feel comfortable going past that point, or they feel like the patient would be too high risk and they would just say, hey, this is as high as we're going to go, right? So they are having patients that are having like chronic pain that can't get treatment, and where do you go from there? So Dr. Hurwitz would prescribe his opioids as titration to effect. He says that he would adjust the dose until it works. If you stop having a therapeutic response to it, he would double it. And then if you stopped having a therapeutic response to that, he would just double that. So, I mean, essentially you're quadrupling those dosages, which is kind of insane. He was prescribing large amounts of narcotics. One patient talks about how he had 4 prescriptions of 400 tabs, 80 milligram tablets of OxyContin. He had 10 bottles of OxyFast liquid. He had Dilaudid. He had 2 prescriptions for 400 milligrams, so 800 milligram total, and he had methadone. Now, Dr. Hurwitz says that the median script from his office was between 2 to 3 grams of morphine. So if you were taking that in 30 milligram pills, that's 70 pills a day. In 1996, a drug wholesaler actually called the DEA and said, hey, there's a small family-run pharmacy that's out here ordering just a shit ton of opioids. So the DEA shows up and is like, hey, yo, what's going on in here? That pharmacy was actually filling 80% of Dr. Hurwitz's prescriptions. So the Virginia Medical Board temporarily revoked his license due to like what they were perceiving as an excessive prescribing from Dr. Hurwitz. In July of 1996, they held a hearing to decide whether they would permanently revoke that medical license or not. Patients felt like not only was this a licensure issue, but it really was life or death because this doctor wasn't replaceable. One of his patients actually got involved as she was an attorney who had called a police officer from New York State, and they were just kind of chit-chatting back and forth. They've had maybe 5 to 7 phone calls, and then this patient gets a VHS tape mailed to her, and she thought it was a rant because this guy's going off about like the medical board going after the doctor's license, and he says that Hurwitz is the only doctor who will help. And then come to find out the tape was actually a suicide tape. There were about 6 to 7 patients of Dr. Hurwitz that had ended up killing themselves due to their inability to get treatment from any other doctor. The Virginia Medical Board used the argument of like, well, if I took that dose, I would be dead, which is true because you don't have a tolerance like a lot of these patients do. So they brought on top pain specialists from across the country who they thought were going to support their opinion, but they actually ended up supporting Dr. Hurwitz. So the medical board in 1998 reinstated his license, and they told him that he had to do 120 hours of pain management training. Hurwitz would go on to develop a consent form for treatment that described the risks of taking opioids, taking high amounts of opioids, telling them that, like, hey, you're going to get screened like a complete medical history, and that they also did drug testing. The DEA told Hurwitz that he has to turn in names, addresses, and prescriptions for all of his patients on a quarterly basis, which he says that he did religiously. Around this time, we're seeing a uptick in narcotics, especially in the media. And so 60 Minutes did a segment, and they asked Dr. Hurwitz if he would come on and talk about painkillers. Now, the interviewer brought up that, hey, in a 2-year period, that Dr. Hurwitz had prescribed more than 90,000 narcotics to a single patient. And Dr. Hurwitz defends himself. He's like, yeah, he goes, the dose is irrelevant. Whatever it takes to make the pain tolerable with minimal side effects is what the prescription should be. So after this episode comes out, he gets lots of phone calls from people all over the United States looking for pain relief. So there's a patient, Molly Shaw. She was diagnosed with neuropathic pain above her right eye. She said it was the size of a pin and that it was like brain freeze that never went away. She was told by other physicians that the pain was all in her head. They actually referred her to a neurosurgeon where she ended up having brain surgery, and then post-operatively couldn't walk, couldn't talk, was in diapers, like had to relearn everything, but that pain was still there. She went and saw Dr. Hurwitz, got prescribed narcotics, and did relatively well. Brett McCarter, he had had a fall off of a roof, and so he had a posterior and anterior spinal fusion due to 2 missed compression fractures in his x-ray. He said that the pain was so bad he would sit and cry, and it got actually to the point that he admits sitting on the side of a bed with a pistol in his mouth ready to end his life, but he just couldn't pull the trigger. After initially seeing Dr. Hurwitz and getting all these prescriptions, he kind of sat in his car thinking, like, this guy's it. This guy's unreal. I just hit the jackpot. Laura Cooper, she was the attorney. She was diagnosed with acute fulminating version of MS, and within 6 weeks of her diagnosis ended up in a wheelchair. She said she was treated like a head case instead of the neurological case that she was. That Dr. Hurwitz would sit at her bedside in the hospital and just, do some studies, pour over her medical records, ask questions, really kind of dive deep into her background. And she said that, she would get IV pushes of opioids at the right time, and she just felt like she got a lot better under his care. Now there's Paul Nye, who is the husband of Mary Nye. Mary was a patient of Dr. Hurwitz. Mary said that she fell in line at the grocery store. Her husband Paul does say that there is no records or video or anything that proved that there'd been a problem. But Mary said that she had had lower back pain, severe but sometimes tolerable. The first time she saw Dr. Hurwitz, she got 200 OxyContin, and then 2 weeks later it was doubled. And another 2 weeks after that, that was doubled. So late 2001, Paul had gotten called into his HR department with, his wife. His wife had to attend. And their health insurance had gotten a hold of Paul's employer and said, hey, WTF is going on. This lady's getting like a shit ton of opioids, and the cost of covering this is insane. Paul had called Dr. Hurwitz and told him, like, hey, like, this is an insane amount of narcotics that, like, you're prescribing my wife. Dr. Hurwitz is like, nah, this is all fine. Paul still concerned over them and over the use of them, but Mary would not accept help from anyone else but Dr. Hurwitz. Michaelina Woodson is the wife of Rob Woodson, and she says that her husband was an addict prior to meeting him, that her husband had sold drugs, which is kind of a bad guy, but when they met, that he was in the position of, like, straightening his life out, right? He had hurt his back in a work-related injury, and so he was seeing Hurwitz for pain management. She was saying that the cost for these meds was insane, that in a 6-month span, Rob had accrued $30,000 worth of medication. Unfortunately, Rob started to sell these OxyContins, and he ended up becoming essentially the biggest dealer on the East Coast. Hurwitz said that Rob was accused of robbing a pharmacy, but was proven innocent, and says that he was unaware that Rob was selling the OxyContin during, his time of treating him. He didn't think that it was a valid basis in which to decide whether you were treating a patient or not, as the status of a potential drug addict or drug dealer shouldn't determine a medical relationship. So between 1998 and 2002, ERs saw a quadruple increase of oxycodone abuse. So who do you blame for that? Do you blame pharma, who's selling directly to the consumer and advertising, right? They're pushing doctors to prescribe opioids for longer periods of time. Other pharmaceutical companies, they start flooding the market with opioids, and so now it's really easy to get a hold of them, and accessibility really drove the explosion of this epidemic. Hurwitz says that he wouldn't really make an insane amount of money off of prescribing opioids, and that he wouldn't cut off patients if they said that they had a zero way of being able to pay for things. So just for reference, at the time, 300 OxyContin was $2,000. The federal government launched Operation Cotton Candy in October of 2001, and they worked with the FBI, and they were targeting dealers, and then to go from dealers to suppliers, and then suppliers, they're seeing where are they getting these prescriptions from. With the pressure coming in to the DEA, they started going after doctors who prescribed high amounts of opioids. The DEA tells doctors to only prescribe for people who need it, not who will use it to party. But how are you supposed to be able to tell those apart? Are you really going to ask a patient, hey, this OxyContin I'm about to prescribe you, are you going to go take it out, snort it, and, go out and party? No, they're going to tell you, no, I'm having pain. So there's really no way either, too, to be able to test if someone's having pain because it's so subjective. Now, Hurwitz had a nurse, and she said that they would actually have meetings about problem patients, as they called them. People who maybe lost prescriptions, ran out remarkably early, would maybe say that their dog chewed up the prescription. They were immediately flagged and they were talked about. And so Hurwitz would have to have long conversations with patients who were flagged. Brett was actually one of them. And I mean, he flat out asked him, he goes, "Hey, are you selling my pills?" To which Brett says that he lied. But he says that he's like, "I had no income and I was able to get my scripts filled. So it was obvious that I was selling." But I mean, can you really put that on the doctor? Maybe he's naive, or he just believes what people tell him because you want to believe that patients aren't lying to you. The ex-wife of Hurwitz said that they had patients who were slumped in their office, nodding off. They had track marks on their arms. They smelled of cigarettes and alcohol. And she said that her husband, well, ex-husband now, should have known. She said that at one point she had actually followed a patient outside the office. They had left using a cane and they were limping, but by the time that they got to the van, that they weren't limping anymore, opened up the door, threw the cane inside, and got into the driver's seat and drove away. The wife brought it up to him and he just kind of brushed her off and was like, "Nope, the patient's reporting that they're in pain." For patients that had failed drug tests, he would try to taper them off of some of the medication, maybe try and make switches, impose different controls on them, but he was still wanting to take care of that person. On the policy, though, on his own policy, it says that if you had popped hot, that you would be discharged. I mean, Hurwitz's wife or ex-wife used to tell him that Brett was going to get him locked up. And he actually tells that to Brett once. And he was like, you're going to end up locked up and I will be too. But then he continued prescribing. And I mean, Brett left that day with, a script for 1,600 Oxy. There was 36 dealers that had been arrested that all of their leads had led back to Hurwitz prescriptions. Brett was actually taking 10 times the lethal dose. And so June 3rd, 2002, Brett was arrested for dealing. Rob had agreed to work with the police since they had caught him dealing and as well being a distributor. And so he had called up Hurwitz's office and was like, "Hey, can I get an appointment?" And I mean, he hadn't seen Hurwitz for 8 months and he was able to get in ASAP. So the DEA said that their case wasn't about the quantity of meds being prescribed. It was about the extracurricular activities that were happening outside the office that they were alleging that Dr. Hurwitz knew. The recordings were kind of telling that he was aware, but continued to prescribe. He knew that patients were testing positive for cocaine. He was administering that urine test, and he knew that some of his problem patients had been arrested for distribution of drugs and cocaine. When Rob went in for his appointment with Dr. Hurwitz, they had him wear a wire, and so they have him on tape. Rob mentions that he had been told that the police knew that he was dealing, but he kind of plays it off, and he's like, "Oh, well, you guys would charge me if you had anything on me." To which Hurwitz comments, "Well, you guys are savvy with this kind of thing. You know what to say." The mention of prison is made, and Hurwitz tells Rob that he's like, "Well, I would go to a resort type of prison, and Rob would, be doing hard time." He says, "Us white-collar criminals, they give us tennis courts, golf courses, computer rooms, libraries." Probably not a great thing to say. So Hurwitz was arrested and he was incarcerated while awaiting trial, and he was actually forced to close practice. He was charged on large-scale drug trafficking. So there was a few patients that had died under Hurwitz's care. In August 2002, there was a patient that had died where they were prescribed oxy, methadone, and Valium enough for 1 month. And the idea was that they would come back before they start going through withdrawals, but unfortunately, they had died October 4th, 2002 from acute and chronic pancreatitis. They thought that maybe the withdrawal had masked the acute part of the pancreatitis. In 2004, the government took Hurwitz to trial, and he faced 62 counts of drug trafficking. The DEA made it seem like they were saving the streets and all these people from this horrible drug, and Hurwitz was actually convicted on 50 counts out of 62 and was sentenced to 25 years in prison. He did end up getting a new trial in 2007. His new defense team took him on pro bono. So people that were brought in to kind of testify against Hurwitz initially, they admit that they had conned the doctor and that they were getting the pills to sell them, which was kind of crazy because they also ended up serving less time than Hurwitz did. So make that make sense. So they actually brought in patients that were, considered saved by Dr. Hurwitz. And so the central focus of this case was revolving around Hurwitz was a doctor and not a drug dealer. 10% of patients fell into drug seekers, abusers, addicts, and so they had said that Hurwitz had used the same methodology for all the patients and was very consistent in how he treated them. Hurwitz's defense team argued that it's an unfair burden to ask of doctors to find out if their patient is lying or not, and that that's actually a job for the DEA. Hurwitz argued that if he knew some patients were abusing or doing other drugs, he couldn't stop treatment right away because the withdrawal from these high of doses would be tantamount to torture. So the case was overturned and Hurwitz was found guilty on 16 lesser counts, and he was released from prison after 4 years and 8 months. His medical license was permanently revoked, though. So when you kind of catch up with some of the patients, in 2015, Molly Shaw says that she's been kicked out of every ER in pretty much her entire state, and that her husband has as well, because he says that they won't leave until her pain gets taken care of. The author of that paper, Portnoy, now says that they grossly underestimated the addiction of opioids, and now we're seeing addiction rates up to 30 to 50%. When you talk with Brett, he says at the time of the interview that he's been off of narcotics for about 50 to 60 days and that he's much more awake now. He's coherent and that he's got energy. He does have pain, but, he's living with it. And honestly, you can tell because when you first encounter him and you talk to him, I would not be surprised if he started nodding off. He can't keep his eyes open. I couldn't even really probably tell you what color his pupils are. But when you catch back up with him, he's awake. His eyes are open. He's outside doing work, and he talks about how he's trying to repair the relationship with his son. The other two patients that we had talked about, Rob and Mary, both had died from overdoses on opioids, unfortunately. So this kind of stimulates the question of how can we be passionate providers while not feeding into addiction? I do kind of agree with Dr. Hurwitz was saying that it's easy to mischaracterize patients as addicts, and that you can't let that really get into the way of a professional or a medical relationship, which I get that. But at the same time, if you've got someone that, yeah, it is a concern. If you're going and dropping $1,600 a month on, or even $2,000 a month going to get your pain meds, but you have no documented job, I would be asking, how are you getting these? Are you financially okay? Help me kind of understand. And so you're kind of in this ethical dilemma of you don't want to assume the worst about somebody, but I think it's okay to kind of be curious, to be hey, how is this working out? Something similar like this kind of happened in my small hometown of Rosalia. There was a nurse practitioner, Susan Bowen Small, or Susie. She had had her license revoked after 3 of her patients had died from taking prescribed painkillers. Some patients were exceeding the 15 times daily dose of pain medication that Washington State considers a threshold for pain management specialists. She said her small clinic caters to poor patients who deal with chronic pain. So she was facing charges that she had overprescribed opioids and failed to establish pain management contracts in a timely manner with at least 9 different patients from July 2011 to July 2013. And these were patients that were taking high doses of oxy, methadone, and other opioids. She was also accused of failing to conduct periodic tests to determine if patients would be responding adversely to these high levels of narcotics. In 2011, Bowen Small had prescribed opioids to 78% of her Medicare patients, and that was compared to the national average of 21%. The crazy thing, though, is that's not her first rodeo. She had a run-in in 2003 when working at a clinic in Garfield, Washington, that she was prescribing stronger pain control meds that weren't within her scope to be doing so. She was actually using a different name and DEA number of a physician who had zero idea that she was doing that. And so this all kind of wraps up, too, with treatment of her Hep C patients. Bowen Small treated at least one patient who was allegedly overprescribed, and they had not even met face-to-face until several months after the methadone and OxyContin prescriptions had been written. And because I'm a woman and I'm nosy and I can do better investigative work than the FBI at times, I found the documents from the nursing board about this nurse practitioner. So patient A had a history of Hep C, and there was no record of opioid risk screening tool in the initial patient evaluation. I mean, this patient got hella drugs up in this B, like Oxy, a muscle relaxer, and Xanax. Sounds like a good time to me. There was no record of reviews that are required in pain management, but Bowen Small kept increasing doses and regular monthly prescriptions throughout 2012. January 2013, the scripts were about the same, but adding in methadone. That month, though, patient A had died from a combined drug toxicity per the Spokane County Medical Examiner. Pulmonary fibrosis and cardiomyopathy were also indicators in the death. There was 2 other patients that had died in March 24th, 2013 and June 5th, 2013. The nursing board said, hey, you got to give it 2 years as you are restricted from working as a nurse, but NP, GTFO, indefinitely suspended. And from what I can find, the RN license is expired. The Idaho license is expired. There's an Idaho NP application, but that was around the time of like the whole prescribing out of scope. So Idaho actually did something intelligent and said, no, thank you. Looks like 2016, her RN license was suspended because she was non-compliant with this assigned education from her 2014 bust. So the nursing board said, give me that license and get the hell out of my face, ho. And this is funny because it's, well, I guess not really funny, but I mean, it's a small town, right? Everybody knows everybody. There's 500 people, and that's probably including all the cattle. I brought my college boyfriend home once, and I had people that stopped like in the street and was like, hey, who is that? I got messages on Facebook asking who I was with walking downtown. So when Susie's clinic was getting some real sketch people hanging out outside, it was very easy to tell these people aren't from Whitman County. Like, you're not from here. You're not from any town around here. I would know. And I mean, we were getting out of state people too that were coming to visit, even like pretty deep northern Idaho to come see her. And I remember I had a kid that was like a year younger than me. He was a freshman and he had like a marijuana card and told people in class like, oh yeah, if you just go and tell her that you have pain, you can get one of these bad boys. I feel like it's an ethical dilemma a little bit when it comes to treating pain. I've worked with plenty of doctors who were nervous to go above like what typical dosing is. I think the highest I've ever given is probably like 90 milligram of extended release morphine, but that was a hospice patient that was actively dying in the ICU. I did give an oral dose of Dilaudid. It was an 18 milligram dose with a 2 milligram IV push. I remember like asking the doc, I'm like, hey, do you want a Narcan drip afterwards? Because I'm definitely going to overdose this patient. And he kept reassuring me that he's like, no, you're fine. The patient can handle it. And holy shit, did they. I was like that meme of like the serial killer standing on the sidewalk, kind of hidden. Like I was lurking outside that room, just waiting for them to like stop breathing. And for reference, like typical hospital dose would be like an IV push would be 0.2 to 0.4 milligrams, with like 1 milligram of Dilaudid being a little on the higher end for, you know, dosing. 1 milligram of Dilaudid is 8 milligrams of morphine. So fun fact. But yeah, I think pain is so subjective, and like we've seen people abuse it when coming into the ER, where like they've found out that if they say, hey, I've got chest pain, I've got this, and they actually aren't having that, they're just saying it to be seen first, like that's really shitty. Or like, you know, you get the stereotypical someone being like, oh, I'm in 10 out of 10 pain, and they're like scrolling on their phone, and you're like, okay, so if I hit it right now, whatever area hurts, then it's not going to hurt, you know, even worse. So I think there is a lot that kind of goes into this opioid epidemic that we're seeing, but it's so hard to point the finger at like one thing. I think it can be a slippery slope when you're trying to decide to treat a patient. And like I said, how high is too high? Is it the doctor responsibility or is it the DEA responsibility? I don't think it's a bad idea for them to be like, hey, if you're prescribing like hella narcotics, like we want to know who these people are, where they live. Like, absolutely. Yeah. Because you should be the one that's patrolling and making sure that they're not, you know, out here selling my shit that I'm prescribing them. That being said, when they come in and they're popping hot on a Utox, then maybe, yeah, I don't know. And I mean, you really can't cut them off, right? Because they are going to go into withdrawals. They're going to end up in your ER. They're going to have to be in the hospital. It's just like a no-win situation. So I don't think there's a good answer for this. I don't think that there's a good resolution. I don't know. Somebody out there tell me. I know Japan has a very strong non-addictive, non-opioid pain medication that they had developed. Large trials are currently going on in the US. So maybe that is a nice little, light at the end of this insane tunnel, but we will find out. I don't know what I'm doing next week. I know I wanted to do like a little, I don't know. I wanted to do some kind of like true crime or something. I don't know. I'm all over the place. But what you can expect is that we will be here next Tuesday. I'm going to record a couple episodes ahead of time. That way we can pack up our computer, get it over to the new house and get it unpacked. And then I won't have to worry about, car noise in the background, which will be so nice because we live like right on a really busy street. So I will be very excited to just have nothing but blissful peace. So I will see you guys next Tuesday. Okay, love you. Bye.